G'day legends, I hope that you are having a fantastic day. Now we're going to start a little bit differently, but today we are going to talk about Ukrainian operators working in Africa. We're going to look at the leadership problems between Zelensky and Zaluzhny. Of course, we're going to look at the maps and we're going to talk about F-16s in Ukraine and a little bit of everything as per normal. But we are going to start differently and we're going to talk about Avdiivka and the maps in the very start of the video. And to be honest, the situation we are seeing, it feels like deja vu from this time last year and of course the Battle of Bakhmut, where countless amounts of men were poured into this war, many of whom would actually never reach the front line and have their ability to fight, being struck with indiscriminate mines, artillery, and targeted drones. And of course, many, many more being permanently disfigured from this ruthless, bloody battle. And this is almost to a T exactly what we are seeing again here. And this loss of human life here, it's nothing to celebrate. No matter which way when the line moves, it makes you feel. French news says, if Bakhmut was a butchery, Avdiivka is even worse. So let's have a look at the maps and see what exactly is happening down in Avdiivka. So of course here we have Ukraine in the center and the capital. Of course these red areas occupied since 22 or the 22 invasion, and the purple since 2014, this being Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk. Now let's have a look at Avdiivka. Now Avdiivka sits almost as a suburb to the north of Donetsk city itself, almost connected through here. And what we have seen is that over the past, say, 8 weeks, that Russia has been making a big push on the flanks of Avdiivka, and in the past few days has pushed into the first houses on the north of Avdiivka. I'm going to talk about why this is important and where the propaganda around this is sitting. So the big moves were really made in the past, say, 3 or 4 days. So if we want to push back, we're looking at mainly this Vesely. Now this movement up here, this is where we saw those Russian special forces move underground through the tunnels and have made and held this gap out here. Online commentators have said this was cut off. Well, it hasn't been cut off, but what we have seen over this week is this multiple kilometer push from near Vesely out to the start of these northern houses in Avdiivka, and then over the past day or two continue into these, and between yesterday and today that Russia has expanded its control here, pushing on this northern flank, and of course putting these supply routes into Avdiivka in danger of further being cut off. Now you will see there are some changes. Ukraine did manage to make back some ground right up in this northeastern flank on this railway system that runs through here. Of course, this railway comes down here. This is where Russia are right up to at the moment. But as far as large moves, that is exactly where it's sitting. And we will compare maps in a second. But the propaganda machine here, it is in absolutely full swing, saying that Russia has been crushed here, and the other side saying that Ukraine is about to collapse and completely withdraw. And you'll find this all over social media. Now, YouTube has a strict anti-Russian policy, so you won't see much of that here. But if you go onto Twitter or Telegram or those groups, then you will see that. And all effective propaganda has an element of truth. And this is best pointed out by German-American academic Hans Hermer. And we'll see in what he has written in this. Now, good propaganda need not to lie. In fact, must not lie. Propaganda, which makes use of the lie, cannot have success in the long run. But a right idea must also be set forth in the appropriate way. In other words, the secret of propaganda is to tell the truth in the appropriate form. So all propaganda has an element of truth, but you're telling it in what he says is the appropriate form. So you're moving that information around to suit the narrative that you're pushing forward. And propaganda, this is nothing new. We've seen propaganda as long as war has existed, prostitution has existed, and propaganda has existed. It's soldiers' favorite things. My problem with propaganda now is that propaganda is incentivized through algorithms. They're then monetized, and counter narratives blocked by certain social medias, that you end up having one narrative, and if you lean into that, the algorithm pushes it, people are making millions upon millions of dollars off it, and then that becomes the truth. And I think we're seeing just the beginning of where this propaganda goes. And I hate my titles, my thumbnails, and sometimes my choice of wording in the videos. And I will not claim that I'm not part of this problem. But that said, I always tell what I see as the truth, and have risked having my account permanently deleted at points, and as well many, many times being hit by algorithmic problems as well, as you've probably seen. But I'm not sure how these people actually sleep at night knowing that they are just lying through their teeth. So as I promised, we'll have a look at where the maps are comparing. We don't have many map updates today, but we do have a Syriac map and then the deep state map to compare. And this is looking very, very similar in where the actual amounts of ground is being held. Maybe some more out just to the east of this reservoir shown on Syriac, but nothing too major. If we look where the train line's coming down, these are the important areas. It is lining up a lot. And I actually saw another Ukraine daily map updates that he posted. Look at the maps today if you want to be upset. And he showed very similar to this of this Russian advance. Now let's look at what Syriac says. Russian army began advancing from two axes along the Avdiivka quarry. From the east, troops took control over the rest of the Gardening Association, moving the front line to the landfill of the quarry and Verba Gardening Association. From the west, Russian forces advanced along the streets of these streets here. Situation for the Ukrainian army continues to deteriorate, and new breaches of urban defense are occurring. And Russia is moving and making ground into this area and securing more zones and pushing into this urban area of Avdiivka. And of course, the casualties that we've seen is nothing yet to what we will see once there is either a close-off or an urban warfare through Avdiivka. So Russia is on the offensive, and they are successfully making ground in areas and on the axis of which they are pushing on. And these are very important for the city of Avdiivka to continue being held by Ukraine. And Ukraine are inflicting huge losses onto the Russian side. So these are the two parts of propaganda that you'll see people lean into, that either Russia is making all this ground or on one side, and that Ukraine are inflicting huge losses. Now, both sides of that are correct, but it's the way they will then push on from there. But Ukraine are inflicting huge losses on the Russian side, and this is expected for any modern assault, with the use of drones, artillery, mines, armoured vehicles, infantry troops. Absolutely, we would expect this. And with Ukraine doing that to Russia, with, in many cases, superior tactics, it's no shock to us that Ukraine is inflicting huge casualties on the Russian side. And Ukraine are redeploying or deploying reinforcements into this area, along with more helmet camera footage today showing Ukrainian special forces. And these special forces took a few Russian POWs. You need to remember, though, the old 3-to-1 rule, that you need 3 times the soldiers to be on the offensive than you do the defensive. Now, this doesn't exactly correlate into losses, but losses will be significantly higher in the case, say, on the Russian side on the offensive. And don't think that this doesn't happen in reverse, and didn't and won't happen when Ukraine went on the offensive. This is just how warfare works. Now, Russia's upper hand in this war is manpower, just the amount of people they've got, and the quantity of weapons. And Russia knows this. They lean into that. And Soviet tactics have reflected this through many, many wars. So speaking of losses, we got an idea of Russian losses in Bakhmut with the late Yevgeny Prigozhin, who, for all his faults, actually did push back against the Kremlin and its lies. Of course, this is why Prigozhin ended up going skydiving on his final day. But he admitted that there was over 20,000 Wagner soldiers killed in Bakhmut. And we will never know the Ukrainian losses in Bakhmut. They are likely lower than this, but still would be very high. And I personally know and served in the Australian forces with multiple guys who, of course, were out of the Australian forces who went to Ukraine to fight, but with multiple guys who died in Bakhmut. The world is small, but not that small. We know the losses there were catastrophic for both sides, that were amounting into huge, huge numbers. And these losses of both Ukrainian lives, foreign fighters, and Russians, these will skyrocket once this battle moves further into the city of Avdiivka. Much like Bakhmut, luckily for Ukraine, Bakhmut was never cut off like we saw in Mariupol. But Avdiivka, at least at my assessment, has the risk or a higher risk of actually being cut off. Primarily, I see from the flatness of Avdiivka, and that is the difference we're seeing between Mariupol and Bakhmut with losses, but Avdiivka still is at threat of being cut off, and I'll show you why I believe a higher risk than Bakhmut ever was. Firstly, we see how deep in some of these Ukrainian forces will have to be into here and where Russia is pushing on these axes with, say, a 5-kilometer gap through here. 5 kilometers in war with modern weapons is nothing. Any drone, heavy machine gun, artillery tank can touch side to side of this, no problem. So here we have Avdiivka. Now, this is on the Syriac, but on the Google Earth where you can see the actual territory. Look how just flat everything is here. Of course, Russia have some high ground out on this eastern flank, which you can see just pick up over here. But this area is where we're talking about. This 5-kilometer gap is basically very flat, open farmland with some other little settlements, but not that much as far as infrastructure of main roads coming in here that aren't going to be under more fire control by Russia. Then we come up. This, of course, is Bakhmut in here. Now we have Ivanovsky, and we saw then the roads of life crossing through here, through Ivanovsky, and of course the one up through Kromove. But the main reason I see here is look at how much more rolling hill and hilly that this is to the western side of Bakhmut coming through here. And of course, the reinforcements going into Bakhmut for Ukraine could use this ground to their advantage, and of course made it more difficult for Russia to try and close that gap, but also easier to get more guys in and back out because it wasn't just flat ground. Now, Ukrainian reporter Yuri Butsov has said the situation is critical. The 110th Mechanized Brigade, as well as several attached units, are engaged in battles with an enemy that is several times superior in strength and is constantly applying fresh reinforcements to its infantry. Avdiivka urgently needs fresh reserves and rotation of units. Ammunition is also necessary. Supplies are extremely small. The enemy has a great advantage in means of destruction. So that is just my assessment of exactly what is happening there. It is not a great situation for what is happening for Ukraine currently in this area, and a cutoff here would be absolutely catastrophic. I'm not saying, I don't think that's the most likely course of event, but the roads in and out of here are not what it was in Bakhmut. Now, just on the map, we haven't seen any changes up through Bakhmut or anywhere else on the map over the last 24 hours, except for in this area near Terney. This map today reflects very similar to then what Syriac was saying yesterday, that Russia has expanded control in this ground. Of course, they said yesterday that it was 1.5 kilometers from Yampolivka. This is saying about 2.6, depending where we go from, 2.5, but they have expanded control here. So these maps are lining up. It's becoming more relevant that Russia is making ground out towards Terney here as well. Now, something that I want to speak about in this is I think if Russia has a plan for this offensive overall, and they've got the equipment, the men to actually do the offensive, and that is a question too. You can question if they've actually got the capacity to launch it. But if they do that, the time for them to do it is probably now. Ukraine is having some problems. It has political woes. We'll talk about that with Zelensky and some other leadership, and of course has a very well-published ammunition shortage at the moment. And this shortage of shells, this is obvious and well known, and this has been acknowledged by everyone. The point is indisputable. Not only has this been caused from the West's failure to meet targets for this ammunition, but also from officials stealing tens upon tens of millions of dollars funding directly meant for these shells. And we'll see that in this from January the 28th. And this is just one of many scandals like this. And these scandals make the news. We have no idea how many of these scandals never make it because it isn't in this amount or it hasn't actually been found out. We're 2 years into war, and this shit is still happening. It is disgusting for the men on the front line who are fighting. If I was one of those guys on the front line who was laying down my own life or my mates' lives, and pricks back in their bloody ivory tower were doing this, I'd be out for blood. And I'm glad that Kyiv is actually trying to lock down on this as much as they can. But 2 years in, this still happening. Not a great sign. But employees from a Ukrainian arms firm conspired with Defence Ministry officials to embezzle almost 40 million, earmarked to buy 1 million mortar shells for the war with Russia. So this is from the SBU, and we know that there is a huge, huge shortage of mortar shells. They're being rationed all over the front line for Ukraine. And not only with this, we're seeing also Ukrainian leadership issues, with Zelensky on Italian TV last night hinting more at some leadership shakeups. Of course, primarily with the commander Zaluzny being sacked, and everyone's waiting, I guess, for that to come through. Zelensky said a reset, a new beginning is necessary. I have something serious in mind, which is not about a single person, but about the direction of the country's leadership. When we talk about this, I mean a replacement of a series of state leaders, not just a single sector like the military. If we want to win, we must push in all the same direction, convinced of victory. So I think there has been some leaders in this who he sees that aren't completely convinced of a Ukrainian victory. Now, you can have your own opinion on whether that is the reasonable thought process with some of these areas like Crimea, or how this leadership as a whole needs to shuffle. But here lies the problem. Zaluzny is incredibly popular in Ukraine, more popular than even Zelensky. Now, this is from the Kyiv Independent. Ukraine's trust in Zelensky declines to 62%. Trust in the military and Zaluzny remains high. And this is from not before speculation started, but well before when the sacking has come up. And this is in December 23. Trust in Zelensky declined to 62% compared to 84% in December. At the same time, the percentage of those who said they do not trust Zelensky increased from 5% to 18%. So a large incline in those that don't trust Zelensky. And this is from KISS, who's from Ukraine, asking Ukrainians. Trust in Ukraine's civilian government declined to 26% from the 52% recorded the previous year. An overwhelming majority, 96% of respondents, trust the military, a figure that has remained stable since 22. In addition, 88% said they trust Zaluzny, who was not included in the previous year. So we don't know how much trust was in the year before. Trust in court and prosecutors, already low in December from 25 and 21% respectively, further dropped to 12 and 9% respectively. Myself, knowing a lot of people in Ukraine, the trust in court and prosecutors has always been very low. This is one of the things that the EU has pointed at Ukraine and gone, if you're going to join the EU, you have to fix that system. So here we have overall, this is from the KISS's website, of these figures they're talking about. And as you can see, this blue line is the trust and the orange is don't trust. So very few people didn't trust Zelensky in December 21. Many, the majority, did not trust Zelensky in 2021. Then we can see this drop in 22. And then in 23, this has raised by over threefold, as well as his trust has declined here. Now, you can pull a lot out of this, but if we look at Zaluzny, we can just look at the do not trust, very small at 4% to 88% trust. Huge approval rating when we compared then to Zelensky. I know they're in different roles, but it is still relevant. And as we can see, trust in the SBU is still, 50, 60%, and do not trust has, sort of dipped in 22, but is going back up in 23. But that is all very interesting to look at. Now, this is not going to collapse Ukraine like propagandists will suggest, but to suggest that it won't have an effect down the line to the front line, well, that is incorrect. It will have an effect. And with the uncertainty of the future of US aid to Ukraine, this shell starvation, leadership struggles, and of course, Putin's election coming in March, I think if Russia does have anything planned, we will see it very soon. That said, we don't know what they're actually capable of currently with the problems and the losses we have seen Russia incur over the past 2 years. Now, the Netherlands will send another 6 additional F-16s to Ukraine, this being from the Minister of Defence. The Minister of Defence is readying 6 additional F-16s. That brings the total to 24. When these will come in, we are unsure. To be honest, we're expecting them early to mid this year. There's been speculation that they're already there, but it will be a big moment when we first have confirmation that the F-16s are operating in Ukraine, and from that point on, seeing the effect that they will actually have, not only on frontline movements, but in Russia's freedom of movement in the sky too. Now, Russia's Wagner group has been widely known since its involvement in Ukraine, but it has been operating around the world for a number of years. Places like Syria, in African countries, alongside Russian forces and local forces, with a lot of success in these areas. Of course, this comes with alleged war crimes, crimes against humanity. They were backing coups, recruiting soldiers from these areas, as well as hunting and liquidating IS, which has been very successful in areas like Syria, Mali, the Central African Republic, and Libya. And liquidating IS, well, I don't think anyone can say that that is a bad thing, especially in these areas. And I know a Special Operations Forces operator who has worked a lot in Africa and continues to work in Africa, who is as pro-Ukrainian as you can get. But he's also pro-Wagner PMC in Africa. And I've met very similar people in Syria and Syrians who are pro-Ukraine, but pro-Russia Wagner for their involvement in Syria. So we need to look at that. These are separate things. Remember, Wagner is a mercenary group. They go for the highest bidder. And if the Russian government is the highest bidder, well, that's who they're working for. Yes, they're in line like this. But at the end of the day, these wars across borders get very, very complex very, very quickly. Now, I know you're probably saying, Willie, but Wagner has broken up. Well, yeah, but they've broken up into different elements. Now, primarily in Africa, they're working under the new banner of the Afrika Korps, a name echoing Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's German Afrika Korps. And here we see this, of course, being the seal of the African Korps. Now, I don't know what the obsession is with having Nazi ideology between Ukraine and Russia, but we see it all over the battlefield, bloody everywhere. Now, we also know that Wagner has broken up into Rosgvardia and a few other different units as well, and a lot still operating under the Wagner flag. Now, what I'm getting at here is GUR operators, the main Directorate of Intelligence, similar to like the CIA, of course, under Krilo Budanov, have been seen before in Africa, specifically going after Wagner forces and affiliated forces, primarily in Sudan. And we've had more footage of this come out today from then the Kiev Post. Now, I can't show you all of this. This will be on the Telegram if you'd like to see. But we see these operators here under night vision equipment. And the pieces I can't show you is just seeing the liquidated personnel. And then we move forward. Now, there is, I believe, from my reading, there is a translation issue in this, and I'll talk about what it is. So, of course, these with Wagner PMC patches here. Now, what we can presume is that these two guys here aren't likely Russian. How'd you get here? We drove through South Africa to Khartoum. Now, this, I believe, is a mistranslation. And this was from someone I sent this to who said, no, they said the translation think they said SAR, but they reckon it is actually meant to say CAR. So instead of South Africa, they've heard CAR. Sorry, they've heard South Africa instead of CAR. And so Khartoum, this is the Central African Republic that they've driven through the CAR to Khartoum. That is far more likely than from South Africa, of course, with the governments and involvement of Wagner PMC. I guess the jury can still be out on this, but that is what my person has told me from there. To overthrow the local government, we've seen this before with coups being held, that there's 100 of them. So this guy, of course, speaking Russian. Again, that he's believing, or my person's believing, that CAR, Central African Republic, we know Wagner is far more active in the CAR. I don't know if they've got any involvement at all down in South Africa. Significantly different political tides. Ask how they got here and how much they get paid. Of course, then translating across here, this as a while. We never hear how they got here, but we do see that they're getting paid $1,000. We don't know if it's $1,000 USD, we don't have a week or a month, but figures like that, still a lot of money in this area in the world. Wagner has a lot of pull across Africa, especially places like Mali, Burkina Faso, Libya, and we see even things like this, that this was a tribute to National Army of Russian fighters. Of course, this was even more flags and flowers when Prigozhin died, and this was put up after Prigozhin was killed. We see Wagner fighters here training local forces, more support for Russia and Wagner PMC from locals, as well as we even see these Apache medals. And this is when Wagner basically got smoked by the US from Apaches, and these medals were given to Wagner fighters who participated in that, but sort of got smoked. I don't. Maybe it's just very, very dark humor in that unit. But the Kiev Post, who had that video, have sources inside the Special Service of Ukraine saying the work on the destruction of Russian mercenaries and their local terrorist partners in Sudan is likely by Ukrainian forces. Work we have planned in Sudan is being performed. And many have asked why Ukrainian operators are across the world while a war is going on at home. And this falls in line with the GOI chief Kirill Budanov's vowing to destroy Russian war criminals anywhere in the world, wherever they are. But the question of why they're not currently being used in Ukraine, I think this is due to a number of reasons, especially in the asymmetrical warfare factors, but as well as probably a fact that the front line is very stagnant. These guys are better off being used here maybe than back home in Ukraine. And what is the overall legality of this? Well, I can't speak to this, and many nations and groups have made countries in Africa absolute war zones, leaving the situation worse than the arrival. And all the legalities on this will depend on the Sudanese government, if they've invited Ukrainian or have permission to be there. If so, then going after the Russian forces there is likely kosher. Where there may be some friction is targeting locals for joining a group that has had previous links to a group hired by your country, seeing these guys who are obviously from Sudan being part of, say, the Africa Corps, who has links back to Wagner. Where does the legality lie in this? But if a state invites special operators to help its state in sanctioned efforts, inherently there's no legality issue with this. So it all relies on if Sudan has said, yep, you can come help us out, do this, then I see no legal problem in that. But what do you guys think and see when you see this? But legends, that is it from today. I'm sorry this one's long again. I cannot get these bloody down. I'm just yapping. Look after yourself. If you'd like to support me, there's Willie's Wanker Group merch too. But look after yourselves, and I'll see you soon. Okay, bye-bye.